Hello everyone and welcome. This is Avorion episode the first. I'm Enigmius and today we are getting started in this game. I've played a little bit and have to get a feel for the basics. I've actually run through the first part of the tutorial a couple of times now. And for me right now, I just give you a heads up. This isn't about a ship, it's about a shape. We're just kind of messing around with things. I have an idea in my head of something that I want to try to get a feel for what's possible within the game, but also to get some hands-on with the features that might allow me to get to that possibility. So this isn't so much about an idea that I have for a complete ship as it is about messing around with the build system. And as you can see, and if you saw the channel update where I showed some of the footage and described what was possible and what was going on, one of the main things that this game has in terms of building flexibility that you don't really see in a lot of voxel games is the option to rescale the blocks across any axis. So you might start off with a very common 45-degree slope block that's sort of like a cube cut in half on a diagonal, and then you can stretch it so you can turn that angle into whatever you want, which is pretty fantastic. And when you get down to it, that sort of flexibility means the resolution that you can use, that you have at your disposal to create whatever you have in mind, is pretty fantastic. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind from a video presentation technical aspect that we're just going to breeze through here very quickly. First of all, this is playing back at twice the normal speed, and it's just to keep things flowing so that there's less time spent waiting for me to make a decision and place a block, and more time just moving and seeing where things are going and how they're shaping up. We'll see how it goes. We may speed it up as we kind of get some proficiency with the build system and things are moving along. We can just kind of produce a more fluid experience by speeding it up, or we'll just leave it where it is. The other thing to keep in mind is that regardless of what I was doing in previous series, for this episode, and just for the first few episodes, I'm not going to be removing the block selection menus, and that's just for the people who haven't really played the game, who haven't seen how everything works and comes together, to get everyone up to speed and feeling comfortable what's going on, and maybe not feeling as lost. If I started episode 1 removing all of these block selection menus, for the people who haven't played the game, it might be a little bit confusing trying to figure out what's happening. So that's why you're still seeing it. But really, the way the game is set up, you can see when the menu comes up, that top section where it's just like 3.5 rows of blocks or something, that's it. That's the scope of the materials currently available in the game, and it's basically a certain number of blocks for basic material, the same number of blocks, the same shape of blocks for armored material, glass material, glowing material, maybe 2 or 3 others, and that's it. That's the sum total, and everything else comes from the ability to stretch things and move things and manipulate the individual blocks themselves. So it doesn't look like much, but when you get around to the actual manipulating of the blocks, it's pretty much all you need. So this build that I'm doing here, it's not about the ship, it's about the shape, and basically just getting a little bit of hands-on with the build system, producing a little bit complicated shape. What it boils down to is triangles, and this game is more about the triangles than it is about the cubes, as you might notice. But basically the whole idea is I wanted to create what might be at some point the front end of a ship that's round. Not perfectly round, but you look at it and it's very refined. You don't see a lot of blockiness. There's not a lot of harsh transitions, just to see what we can do. And for basically the whole thing that you're going to see, this whole episode, is just me using 4 different blocks: the cube, the basic 45-degree slope, the basic outside 45-degree corner. So if you think of the pyramid with only 3 sides and 2 of them are up against the edges of the cube sort of thing, and the 45-degree inside corner, so it looks like a cube where just a part of it is sheared off at 45 degrees. Between those 4 blocks, we're going to make this front end of the ship and bend it around so that it looks like something that was done without a voxel editor, if we can make it happen. There's a few features aside from just being able to stretch the blocks. That's a huge one. Being able to rescale the blocks pretty much limitlessly is massive in terms of the flexibility and the things that you can do. But there's some other things that can make building potentially easier. One of them is the ability to mirror across all three axes if you want. You can do one axis, two axis, or all three. And you can move the center of the axis to different places on the ship so that you can take advantage of that symmetrical building pretty much anywhere. You're not fixed to the center, the actual midpoint of the ship itself. You can move things around. Makes it a little bit more flexible that way. And the other feature that I didn't even really start looking at until a couple of days ago when I was starting to put together an idea for what I wanted to do for this first episode is the matching feature, the face matching feature. So if you've got all these different blocks that you can rescale to your heart's content, and you place a block and it's got however many faces on it, and then you want to place a block right up next to it to continue that part of the structure, getting the new block to line up properly with the one that you had previously placed could be a very tedious proposition if you're trying to get everything to work. So we've got this match system so that when you go to place a block, you have your mouse cursor or the center of the screen pointed at the face of the block you want to put the new block next to. And if it's possible, if it's the same shape, the same kind of triangle or square or whatever kind of shape, it'll rescale the block that you're about to place to match the size of the block that you're about to place it next to. If that doesn't make any sense, you're basically seeing it happen right in front of you now. Once we get the blocks rotated, oriented the way that we want, you'll notice I'm not really doing a lot to change any of the parameters of the blocks. You don't see me necessarily stretching a lot of them. I'm just placing the cursor over the face that I want to match, and everything just sort of works out on its own and it comes together, and we get these nice seamless transitions which tie everything together. It would be one thing if we could rescale each individual block but then try and match everything. It would probably look pretty horrible. It would be very, very time consuming, tedious, and not necessarily all that fun to do. But we have that feature that allows us to match everything and line it up. One of the things that I've noticed, and you'll see this especially getting a little bit farther away from center here as we move a little bit farther along with the build, is that trying to get things to line up and have that matching thing kick in sometimes requires a little bit of fiddling. I think once I get a handle on the specific nature of that fiddling, it won't be that big of a deal. And by the time I get through this whole thing, I'll have gotten a fairly good sense of what's going on. And it would be nice if there was no fiddling required. It just kind of automatically did what you need it to do, but it's not that bad. It's really a fairly intuitive system, even at its worst. At its best, it's an extremely intuitive system that opens up a lot of doors in terms of what we can expect to accomplish and how easily we can expect to accomplish it. And you can see now, already, it's starting to take on a shape that you wouldn't necessarily expect from a kind of voxel universe. It's just flowing together in a way that's very nice, very happy with it. When you get a chance to look at it from the point of view of, across the surface of it and not just the side where we're doing all the building, it's a fairly elegant execution. You don't see a lot of seams. You don't see a lot of transitions. The one thing that I found that I would like to see maybe different at some point in the future is that you don't have any choice over the textures that are used on the blocks that you place. It's basically decided by the material that you're using, and it's intended so that when you're fighting other players, or even potentially looking at NPC ships that you might be fighting, you would be able to identify what they're made out of based on the texture of the hull and the various different points on the hull, which to me is kind of not the best I think that I would be happiest with a system that, if you really want to know what something's made out of, mouse over it, and you get some sort of indication that says this is a particular material or something, as opposed to making everything look the same, all the same texture based on the material that you're choosing, because there aren't that many materials. Like I say, there's only like maybe a half dozen different kinds of materials that you can be using. So the textures are going to be pretty limited. But when you can make really cool shapes, I can overlook it for the time being. It's one of those little things in the back of my mind. In a perfect world, this is what I would like. But for now, it's definitely not going to slow me down. It's not going to change the way I feel about the build system and the options that are available to us. We just keep curving this thing around. We started with kind of a curved, like a sideways U shape as the main profile. And then once we got that in place, we've just been alternating between the 4-sided inside corner blocks, 45 degrees, and the 6-sided 45-degree inside corner blocks, rescaled, shrunk, expanded, changed, whatever we needed to do. And the whole thing is just wrapping around now. And it's so easy. It's just this very fluid thing, and of course, as I'm describing that, I'm stuck in another one of those little things where I have to fiddle with it to make it fit. I'll get it sorted. Like I say, there seems to be a rhyme and a reason to why it doesn't necessarily want to match the way you would expect it to the first time through, and it's usually just a case of making sure you've got the right face selected, and then scaling the block a little bit, and then when you move the mouse over that face again, it's usually when it kind of snaps into place and everything sort of works. It just needs that little bit of a push when you rescale the block in order to make it think, okay, we've got to do something that we weren't doing previously. Very simple, straightforward. Now this part here, without even realizing it, and I thought this was kind of neat, I missed when I started placing the blocks coming around this transition where we're going from the front and we're sweeping it around, and we're basically now we're kind of heading off to the side is where the transition has brought us to. And in the process of placing the blocks in this particular section, things didn't quite line up perfectly. And what you'll see is the areas where the blocks don't line up right across the seam, like all the way across the edges and all the faces and things all exactly where they need to be, is you get like scorch marks on the hull in the sort of texture department right along the edge that indicate that these things aren't lining up. I had no idea what the scorch marks were for. I thought it was just some sort of arbitrary assignment of the textures that every once in a while you would have this sort of thing happen just as kind of interest. But it was actually an indication that I had missed by just the smallest amount in getting everything lined up across the seam. And the end result, as you can see, that one big scorch mark just appeared when I placed that last sort of wedge. And it just kind of sits there as a reminder, hey, dummy, you missed. Which, I mean, in this case, I'm not really too worried about going back and fixing it because, again, this is about the shape, not the ship. But we're getting there, and we're getting kind of a feel for how everything comes together. And zoomed in, you can see what I'm talking about, just trying to get it to match everything the way that it's supposed to. But once it goes, it goes. And it's very, very straightforward. So the whole idea now that we've made this shape, or just about made this shape, is to consider, first of all, the size of this thing that we've just built relative to what's actually prudent or necessary at this very beginning stage of the game. I neglected to mention that this is done in creative mode, and I did this specifically so that I could just focus on the build options without having to worry about being attacked by things or resources running low or anything like that. And then once we got the shape complete, of course, we've got the scorch marks. The color selection is actually pretty outstanding with this game as well. You get many, many, many different shades of the same base color, so that a lot of the nuanced colors that you might want to do that I always wished that I could have done in Avorion are available, and you just have to have the patience and kind of muck about with it. But you can see now, it's not perfect, it's not absolutely round. You can see, based on the light shining off of the different faces we've created, But I'm very, very happy with the potential here and the opportunity for the things that we'll be able to do as I get a little bit more experienced. So I think, pretty sure, in terms of my first ship kind of scenario, that this is huge. You're going to see, this is my drone. This is the little drone you start in, and now this is the front of whatever ship this would have been. It seems quite large. It seems like I wouldn't be able to expect to do this necessarily at the very beginning of the game. So that's something that I have in the back of my mind that I want to kind of reconcile and make sure that it's I'm not setting myself up with this expectation that I can create ships of a certain size, and then when I get around to a survival kind of setting where there's bad guys and resources limiting how big I can make things, that I'm disappointed. So there's that I have to keep in mind. And also the basic functionality of the ship. It's easy enough to put this together with generators and thrusters and kind of see how it handles. It's another thing to see how it handles in a combat situation. So that's another thing that I've got in the back of my mind. I'm not in a rush to jump into survival. We'll probably do another 2 or 3 episodes, just getting a feel for the very basics. And then I probably at that point will transition at least part-time into survival, maybe keep a creative build kind of environment going on one hand, and then see how everything comes together in survival on the other. So there's all kinds of different things that we can do, and I'm looking forward to it. This was just the test to try and look at the key features of the build system and see what we can come up with, and I'm very, very happy with it so far. So the next episode will start on a ship that will be my first, what will be intended to be my first viable survival ship where I can scoot around and I can mine and I can fight basic bad guys. And then we'll just kind of take it from there and see where it goes. I'm not going to be rushing to get a ship done just so that we can get into survival. I may just take a little while working on the hull and making a ship that I'm really happy with in the appearance category before we throw it to the wolves, so to speak. So if you want to be notified about the next and future episodes in this series, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel and or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.